Now, as we are going through the Bois Jacques, I have to mention you that this has now been cordoned off by the Council of Bastogne to preserve the site. Having said that, let's go in, because there's still plenty to see.
We're now standing in the Bois Jacques, and this is the thick pine woods in the vicinity of Bois, Belgium. That is just a little bit above the all-important crossroads town of Bastogne. And it is here in these woods where Easy Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment will withstand several days of German attacks combined with horrible winter weather, perhaps the worst winter in over a half a century in Europe. And there are a number of things that stand out to me. It's somewhat eerie to walk around these foxholes. It's somewhat of an immersive experience, but the thing that really strikes me is that it is fenced off, and that has been done by the Bastogne Town Council in the effort to save this place and to preserve it. The one downside of that is that none of the other sectors of the American lines around here have been preserved in the same way. And so why is this so? Why is this history being prioritized as such? And simply put, the answer is Hollywood. It's these guys who are depicted in Band of Brothers, and nobody else is. And so the fact that this place is fenced off, you have to pay admission to come into it, that nothing else is protected to this level, it really speaks to the power of historical memory that Hollywood has in determining what we prioritize when we determine who's going to visit historic sites and how are they going to do it. All I can say for we Americans is thank God for the United States National Park Service. So we're now in the vicinity of the Easy Company command post. This is perhaps 100 yards back from the area where Gordon was wounded. And that was the company CP right there. And that is where Norman Dyke would have been hanging out on a good day. We are standing in the downtown area of Bastogne, Belgium, and of course this was the epicenter of the fierce fighting that took place here during the Battle of the Bulge that included this incredibly fierce and iconic standoff with troops of the 101st Airborne Division. But those paratroopers were certainly not the only individuals to be putting up a fight and to be involved in heroic efforts here within the confines of this community. For those of you who are intimately familiar with the series Band of Brothers, you may recall instances within the Bastogne episode in which Easy Company medic Doc Rowe interacts with a young Belgian nurse. And it creates these rather lighthearted moments within an otherwise very dark episode before we're ultimately emotionally shattered by her death. That cinematic depiction is based upon the exploits of a very heroic Belgian nurse by the name of Renee Lemaire, who, contrary to what we see in the film, was not caring for men in a church, but was caring for men in a building that once stood on this site. And as this historical marker shows us, this was an aid station for wounded men within the 10th Armored Division who were likewise stationed here in Bastogne at that time. And unfortunately, it was on the evening of Christmas Eve, 1944, when a 1-ton German bomb landed on this site. It killed 30 wounded Americans and personnel within this structure, and it also led to the death of Renee Lemaire as well. Now, as our guide on this tour indicated, it's highly unlikely that Eugene Rowe and Lemaire probably interacted with one another. However, he said it's a very good use of creative license because it allows the audience to be taken into Bastogne. We get a sense of the broader picture, not only strategically, but personally as well. And it allows audiences also to be introduced to the heroics of many civilians who put their lives on the line on behalf of wounded Allied personnel. And so it is a story that we should not soon forget. And speaking to that lethality of the battle, there's certainly no better tangible relic associated with the fight than this Sherman tank that was decommissioned during the battle. And of course, as we can see here, an enemy round struck it, a direct hit, and it just time and time again speaks to the deadly consequences of combat at that up close and personal level. One of the things that we have to stress as we think about the combat and the bombardments that ensued here in Bastogne in December 1944 and January 1945 was the randomness of death. And there's one particularly poignant story that comes to mind, and it was written in the form by a correspondent, one of the few correspondents who was here in real time as combat was breaking out, and his name was Fred Mackenzie. One evening, Mackenzie was at the nearby command post. He was in a basement. He was assessing the situation, and not far away, his accommodations across the street were blown sky high. The men in his room were killed in that explosion. And this was the sort of grim luck, this luck of the draw that many individuals confronted as they were here. If they were standing in one spot versus another, it could determine whether they lived or perished. And such was the gamble that was unfolding here in the streets of embattled Bastogne.
So why show that? So why show that in the series? Well, this is good use of creative license. Because what Renee Lemaire did is so important, and it's such a symbol in that for the help of the Belgian civilians. The Belgian civilians lent to the Americans during that siege, being subjected to the same conditions and the same misery and suffering as the American soldiers had, that they want to bring in that story, because the story of Renee Lemaire is very well known here in this area. So how do you do that? Well, you know, you meet let a medic meet Renee Lemaire, right? And you start building up that story. So for me, even though it's a historical inaccuracy, I think it's great use of creative license.